And so I didn't really know I really didn't know that about the anniversary. I knew it was coming up, but then it was March 1st and I got hired right January 1st. And they said, you got to start working on the anniversary and figuring out what you're going to do with that. And so I got some research from the park, and according to them, they said, well, there's 29 reservations or 29 tribes that are affiliated with the park. And then when I looked a little further research, a lot of those reservations have more than one tribe on them. So there's actually 49 tribes with ancestral affiliation to Yellowstone National Park. And I got a map of that I'll show a little bit later. But Yellowstone Park is a very sacred and special place to our people. There's plants and medicines that only grow in Yellowstone. Plants and foods and medicines that heal us and protect us and nourish us. It's the only place they can be gotten. And so reading some of the old stories about our people when they used to go up there. From Wind River up to Yellowstone was about a 5-day trail ride up there. And then talk about the things they gathered, different kinds of medicines and how that was used. And so that's what we want to try to get back for our young people. You know, I was just telling Temple, I got twin grandsons, they're 16 years old, and they came back the other day, and boy, they had 2 big old giant bull elk, you know, and I was just so thankful. Number one, my grandsons have that opportunity to go out and hunt. And number two, that they're good hunters at 16 years old. What I tell them, the way things are going now, you know, a few years back, they said, well, Russia hacked into our power system here in the United States. And then we hear all those kind of stories. Well, maybe one of these days, what if everything just shuts down? Everything. And you know, about 20 years ago, remember they were having those blackouts? Well, you young guys probably don't remember this, but some of us remember the blackouts that were occurring back in New England. And people were just lost because they couldn't take the train, there was no electricity, no power. They were just sitting on a sidewalk like in the days. And that might happen. And so that's what I tell my grandsons. They're good hunters, they're good fishermen, they're good campers. They know how to gather, they know how to dry, they know how to take care of our plants and foods and medicine. They know how to take care of our ceremonies. That's one of the most important parts. And so we're trying to regain what we almost lost and strengthen it. And we need help. And so that's why I'm here. I'm hoping you're all going to be one of our helpers. Okay, Temple. This is the map. 49 tribes with ancestral affiliate, with ancestral connections. You know, I've been working with all the tribes in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. They have the Rocky Mountain Tribal Leaders Council of tribes in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming. They meet up in Billings. There in the Great Plains, they have the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Association Alliance. All these reservations here. So I've been working with these reservations. Next, we're working with these here. We start bringing into getting inclusion and more voice on national parks. Were it not for the removal of Indians, there would be no public lands. And most of Wyoming is public land, right? 60% of Wyoming is BLM, Park Service, Forest Service land. And so October of last year, Secretary Vilsack from Agriculture signed Secretarial Order 3403, a joint order between those two secretaries. That's a game changer and starting to recognize the trust responsibility that the United States has with tribes. And it talks about recognizing tribal ecological knowledge, indigenous management practices, treaty rights, nation-to-nation relationship, operating with the highest trust responsibility. That's the kind of talk I like. Too bad it hasn't been like that, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is reinvigorate our prisons. And you know, with COVID that happened here almost 3 years ago now, it really hit the reservations pretty hard. A lot of reservations got hit pretty hard. We got back home, we lost entire families. And we're still losing a person every once in a while. And some of these other reservations, the Navajos, they lost thousands of people. But the other thing about it, then right after that, appointed the Interior Secretary. And with all that media attention about COVID and how it's affecting tribes, a lot of people finally realized, hey, there's Indians here in this country. And so, and then when Deb Haaland gets in there and they're talking about an Indigenous woman finally gets into the Secretary of Interior, the one that handles Indians, right? Interior. And so that's why I think a lot of attention came to us. And especially the COVID was pretty bad. And our elders always tell us, whenever bad things happen, something good always comes out of it. So even though COVID was bad for us, I think it was good that more people start realizing that there's tribes on here. In fact, there's 576 federally recognized tribes in this country. And when I talk about tribes having senior water rights, out of those 576 tribes, only about 36 tribes have done anything to claim and solidify their water rights. So there's still about 540 tribes that haven't done anything. Yet we're seeing all the developers and water engineers and municipalities appropriating and trying to use more water. And look what happened to us in the Colorado River Basin, right? And now they're finally bringing tribes to the table. Oh, these tribes have rights. We better start talking to them because their rights are senior. And that's why I say water is going to give tribes political and economic power that they never ever realized. We got to do it right. Number one, some of the things we need to do with water goes against our belief. We're talking about controlling water. We're talking about managing water. And now we're even talking about actually selling water. That goes against our traditional values and beliefs. The Arapahoes, they call water niche. It's not, they don't translate into water, it translates into the gift of life. That's what niche means, the gift of life. And so that gift of life is really important for us to not only protect, but with drought and climate change upon us, how do we make sure the coming generations at Wind River always have a reliable source of clean water, right? Right. Let's hope we all have a reliable source of clean water, right? So that's where we got to go. Climate change is upon us. Drought is affecting us. Just driving over to Grand Teton or coming back yesterday, the Snake River is just a trickle right now. And some portions of the Big Wind River is just a trickle right now. And that's kind of normal this time of year, but I haven't seen it that low in quite a while. So that's what we really got to start doing at Wind River: water, taxation, energy, and environment. And so we're part of the Missouri River Valley Basin, the Yellowstone River, all of these tribes, Wind River, we're part of the headwaters of the Missouri River Valley Basin. And our water eventually ends up in the Gulf of Mexico, right? In this Missouri River Valley Basin, there's 29 tribes on 26 reservations. And you can see some of them, they're pretty large land base. Cheyenne River, Standing Rock, Pine Ridge, Fort Berthold, Fort Pitt. That's what I was telling my staff and board of directors at GYC. I do little webinars for them every once in a while on tribal sovereignty and some of the things we're working on. But I said, what if all 29 tribes in the Missouri River Valley Basin had the same water quality standards? Tribes would have a major voice in protecting the river. So we got to develop that technical and scientific base. And that's where universities come in. That's where the Haub school comes in. That's where some of you come in. That scientific and technical base, hydrologists, geologists, and those people that's going to help us develop. We even have a couple of the Kiowa. Part of their story of their belief about creation involves Yellowstone National Park. The same way with the Comanche. Well, the Comanche were part of the Shoshone. One time, the Shoshone were one big band. And that's when they were bringing smallpox infested blankets to our people. And the whole band of Shoshones got a bunch of these smallpox infested blankets, and they all started getting sick and dying. And so they said, we're going to have to split ourselves. So they went to 4 directions. So you ended up with the Shoshone, the Comanche, the Paiutes, and the Utes. But they're all Shoshone people. But when back then, they had to disperse themselves to save themselves from smallpox. So all we're trying to do is get back what we've been able to hang on to and reconnect to other places, all the public lands that's around us. These are some of the major, the Christian doctrine of discovery and domination is alive and well today. But Johnson versus McIntosh was the first major case that really looked at us as subhuman pagans, that we shouldn't have any ownership of land. Since we're pagans, we're not entitled to own land. Only the Christians can do that. So that's that case. Non-Christian humans, subhuman pagans were subject to being killed, enslaved, and determined not to have any claim or ownership or rights to their land. And then Bureau of Indian Affairs holds land in trust for tribes and allottees. As individual Indian, I have an allotment. As an individual, our tribe came under the allotment Act, but I can't even own my own land. The BIA owns it and holds it in trust for me. Domination and discovery, right? It's alive and well today. Next slide. This was another act that really killed us. Another attempt to assimilate us, make farmers out of us and give us the concept of land ownership. They passed the Dawes Allotment Act. Each head of household was given 160 acres of land to begin living in their agrarian lifestyle. Individual allottees were given a land patent to their allotment. Allottees could sell their land if they so chose. Lots of shady deals, takeovers, and illegal claims for not paying taxes. This was trust land, but there's cases when Fremont County said, you didn't pay taxes on your trust land, so we're taking it. So there's a lot of other reservations just like that. So there's a lot of skullduggery out there that remains to be uncovered. Many tribes that have accepted the Allotment Act have lost much of their land base. I was working with the Omaha tribe in Nebraska. They got a 300,000 acre reservation. 85% of their reservation is land, fee land. Only 15% is trust, but they still have civil jurisdiction over the full 300,000 acres. That's still recognized. Remember the case that came out of Oklahoma, Supreme Court case, not too long ago? Yeah. Tribe, some of the Pueblos and the tribes in the Southwest, they didn't come under the Allotment Act. So their reservations are still 100% tribal, which is pretty cool, I think. The Allotment Act created an heirship problem where now you can have a 40-acre tract of land with more than 200 interest holders. So that really creates a lot of problems on finance. Tribal members can't utilize their land for collateral or anything because you got to get 199 other people to approve it, right? So that's just a real big giant thorn in the side. Another attempt to assimilate. Next one. Supreme, some of the more important decisions, Major Crimes Act, 15 major crimes under federal jurisdiction. Oliphant, this is where criminal jurisdiction versus civil jurisdiction. And this is where tribes really have to focus right here. Civil jurisdiction. When I talk about water, taxation, energy, and environment, that's all comes under civil authority and control. And tribes, we have civil regulatory authority over everybody within our boundaries, including non-Indians and including fee lands. When I first got into council, we had a man from Riverton buy a bunch of land on the south side of the river and start subdividing it. And it was formerly trust land. And so we took him to court saying, we had a little zoning code. We'd never really thought about it or enforced it, but luckily we had a little bit of a code there. And it ended up going all the way to the United States Supreme Court, called Knight versus Shoshone and Arapaho Tribe. That Supreme Court case. The Supreme Court said, tribe, you have civil jurisdiction over everybody within your boundaries. Indian, non-Indian, fee land, trust land, a lot of lands. So we have full authority and control over everybody and everything under the civil side. And that's where we got to build our strength and our power to control what we have. Brendale, open and closed areas of the Yakima Reservation. Oliphant, I think that was up at the Yakima Res too. Montana versus Crow, protect the health and welfare of reservation residents, the political integrity of the tribe, and the economic security of the reservation. That was a fairly decent case for tribe. In fact, we use this language in some of our codes right now, because that's what we're trying to do, protect the health and welfare. McGirt, reservation boundaries exist. Herrera, the treaty rights predate statehood. And then we just had this Castro Huerta case that came down, which was really kind of a detrimental case for tribal sovereignty. Indian Child Welfare Act, keeping children with their tribes and families. I know that's another case that's being considered on the Indian Child Welfare Act. Next slide, Temple. Winter's Doctrine. This is the most important principle that we can abide by today. The Winter's Doctrine was established on the Fort Belknap Reservation in Montana in 1908. And the Supreme Court said that since reservations were created to be permanent homelands for people, they have a reserved right connected to that land. Winter's right. And it's being ignored and subjugated and disenfranchised and all those words you can use to say that the Winter's Doctrine is always being attacked. It's never been upheld. And so that's the next major step. We're telling Secretary Holland or whoever's in there, you got to uphold the Winter's Doctrine, and you got to have a nationwide proclamation right now. It says tribes have senior rights to water. That's all you got to see. And see, that's what we're hurting. Tribe. We don't have hydrologists. We don't have scientists. We don't have economists. We don't have, people that understand the water picture of where you're at. In our Bighorn adjudication at Wind River, we studied the entire res. Our 2.5 million acre reservation, we're the same size as Yellowstone Park. Yellowstone Park is 2.5 million acres. Same with Wind River. But that 2.5 million acres, we have 1,108 miles of rivers and streams on our res. We have 5 major aquifers. We have 265 lakes at Wind River. Most people don't realize that. We have wetlands. We have geothermal. And so that's really an area that's very well prepared to adapt to climate change and drought. But we got to drive that force, right? So that's really an important part of understanding our red. In the Bighorn adjudication, the special master Wind River lost 2/3 of surface water and has no reserved right to groundwater. And we got limited to one beneficial use was agriculture. So they just blew the hell out of the Winter's Doctrine right there. No reserved right to groundwater. But the good thing is, about 3 years ago on the Agua Caliente Reservation in Palm Springs, California, the court said tribes do have a reserved right to groundwater. So that's where we need to be going, that reserved right to groundwater. Under the Winter's Doctrine, reserved right, have a reserved right to water. Walton rights, a non-tribal member who purchases land from an allottee receives the priority date of the allottee. So we got a few non-Indians at Wind River that have an 1868 priority date because they brought an allotment that had that priority date. Oh, I just mentioned that. Court recognized a reserve right to groundwater at Agua Caliente. Climate change will place tremendous pressure on water use and supply. Tribes and allottees have senior rights. Treaty language is very critical. But in the case of Wind River, they used that against us in our water rights case. And that's how come we got limited to one beneficial use. The Treaty of 1863 and 1868 says the Shoshone Reservation is hereby created as an agricultural reservation. So the state said, well, the only reason the Shoshones and Arapaho should have water is for agriculture. So that was pushing the knife in a little bit deeper, right? And so a lot of them, but there's other tribes that have some pretty decent language. I've seen, we did a lot of research, but I've seen tribes that have the wording calculated to advance them in civilization. Well, that's great language. You're not restricted to being a farmer like the Shoshones and the Arapahoes, right? And I've seen other language, resume the pursuits of industry in a treaty. So that's really, treaty language is very critical for tribes. You got to pick out key words and phrases in that language to uphold the belief that our ancestors were trying to protect the way of life. And that's all we're trying to do. Most of those 49 tribes are on that map. They now have constitutions. In 1934, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act. And that enabled tribes to adopt constitutions if they wanted to have a constitution. And so most tribes nowadays, they do have a constitution. But back in that, right after 1934, BIA was just giving them some boilerplate constitutions that these constitutions don't even have a separation of powers in them. All it is just a listing of the power and duties of the council. But it doesn't really establish that constitutional separation of powers. At Wind River, we're a very unique animal. 2 separate governments, 1 reservation, no constitution. And that's the way I like it. Because I think without a constitution, you have more sovereignty. They don't have you like this. And so that's really what we're working on right now. And when we adopted our water code back in 1990, the state of Wyoming took us to the Secretary of Interior. And they said, those Indians have no constitution. Those Indians don't have no separation of powers. So those Indians shouldn't be allowed to have any laws. That was Wyoming's position when we first adopted our water code. Get out of here with that baloney, right? That's crazy. And so we kind of had to think about it for a while. And a little bit later on, I think I've got a chart about our government, but we were able to create a separation of powers without a constitution. And I'll show you how that's set up. Criminal jurisdiction versus civil. We got to get hot to trot on civil jurisdiction, right? Governmental infrastructure, codes, regulations, tribal court system, technical capability, administrative abilities, organizational chart. We got to strengthen our governments. We got to have strong governments. Figure out how do we address all the good things we have at Wind River. We have water, we have land, we have a lot of solid minerals, we have timber, we have geothermal, we have wind. They don't call it Wind River for nothing. And so we really have a lot of opportunities in front of us. But because of our lack of good baseline data, scientific and technical capabilities, we haven't quite gotten into full steam out of that. The other side of it is physical infrastructure, water, sewer, power, transportation, communication, solid waste, fire protection. That's another area where tribes are hurting. The power systems are already at capacity. They can't bring more energy or more uses in for the energy. And like in Navajo country, they don't even have running water or sewer water systems. So that's part of growth and development, right? You got to have that infrastructure. Next slide, Temple. This is the Indian, I just talked about this, the Oregon's Act of 1934 and tribal governments should adopt constitutions, boilerplate constitution. created by Bureau of Indian Affairs had no separation of powers. Constitution had a list of the powers and authority of the tribe. There was a limitation on transaction and expenditure. Back in the day, people had to go get the authority of the BIA superintendent to get money out of their account. And it's still kind of like that on some reservations. It's crazy. Codes drafted and adopted by tribes had to be approved by Secretary of Interior. That was in their constitution. Get out of here again, right? We don't need BIA approving our code for us. BIA created a courts of Indian offenses on reservation. And all they had jurisdiction over were Indians, right? Indians from one river. They didn't have jurisdiction over anybody else. And so we had our own little criminal code just for ourselves, right? So we could lock ourselves up all the time. These courts were, in fact, when we first adopted our severance tax code in the early 80s, we changed that court of Indian offenses into a tribal court. It's no longer a BIA federal court, it's a tribal court. So that's what to enforce tribal law and uphold civil regulatory authority. This is a real important law that a lot of tribes have really had tremendous success with this. This is Public Law 93-638, titled the Indian Self-Determined Education Assistance Act of 1973. Signed into law by President Richard Nixon in 1973. It empowers tribes to contract certain government programs and functions of the federal government. Tribes enter into, they even call them 638 contracts after the law. Tribes enter into 638 contracts to assume more control and effectiveness of federal efforts. A lot of tribes are taking over Indian Health Service, and boy, they've really upgraded and really improved the health situation for their tribe, because they've used modern techniques and methods and collections and insurance, and third party, all this other stuff. And they're really being able to develop at a much better rate than the federal government. Tribes have to demonstrate they have administrative and financial capabilities as well as authority over land base before they'll approve a contract for you. The states and counties may challenge tribal authority, and that's always happening. Some tribes have dramatically improved the delivery of programs and services. So that's really been an important part for us. Under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, there was a lot of things that were supposed to help encourage tribal energy development. And this never really took off because, of course, you had the BIA that was supposed to be the ones pushing it, right? But under the Energy Policy Act, rather than sign leases, tribes can enter into other business agreements. And we've finally done that on one lease at Wind River. We've got hundreds of leases at Wind River, but we've got one major lease on a big oil field, and it was on a lease agreement that was renewable. They had to come back every 10 years and renew the lease. Well, about 3 years ago, the council said, we're not going to renew the lease. And boy, the companies challenged us, the BIA challenged us, some of our own tribal members challenged us. But under that lease, we were getting a 1/8 royalty, 12.5%. And then the tax burden is 22%. And the state and county collect taxes off of our reservation. But now that we've taken over this one lease, which is one of our major oil producers, 100% of that revenue comes to the tribe. 100%. And since it's under tribal ownership, the states and counties cannot tax it now. The reason they get to tax it is because BIA has these standard leases. And the Supreme Court in a case called Cotton Petroleum said, when you sign a standard BIA lease agreement, you're turning your tribal resource over to a mostly non-Indian corporation. So that non-Indian corporation can be taxed by the state and county. Get out of here again, right? Under the Policy Act, tribes have preference on generation and transmission, but we don't have the capital or the wherewithal to start building power plants, right? So That's one of the things we're working on. We're working on 100 megawatt natural gas fired clean power plant, no emission. So that's what we're working on right now. We need your help. Lots of power generated and economic growth created from Indian water. You know, when I talked about the Missouri River Valley Basin, right, a lot of that is Indian water. It's producing a lot of power for a lot of people. We don't get no credit for that. No kind of recognition. A lot of that economic growth that's going on out there, that's coming from Indian water. And now that we're finally to the point where tribes are getting recognized for their water rights, things are going to start changing. Tribes can adopt tribal energy resource agreements, which means they can assume permitting for BLM and EPA. I think we got to do that. Because BLM and EPA don't do a very good job of permitting and inspecting and keeping track of resources. So, and this is 2005, so and no tribe has signed a TERA. That's what they've done. So that's what we want to do at Wind River. Green energy. We've got about over 200 abandoned gas wells on the res. And just looking at some of the geology, there's about 50 of them that still have enough product in them to fuel a natural gas power plant for 40 years. And then we capture all the emissions. Under a natural gas fired power plant, there's 4 waste streams. Water, which, and you don't use nearly as much water as you do in a coal-fired power plant for natural gas. Just a very small amount, but that can be cleaned up. And heat comes another waste product, and we can put that into tribal buildings and schools and greenhouses and other things. And then carbon dioxide, and you break that down. Carbon dioxide, right? So there's markets and uses for those available too. So a 1 megawatt can provide the power for about 1,000 homes. So we're planning a 100 megawatt plant, and you know, energy is important to your growth and progress and to your people. So we're really figuring how we can utilize that. And then we've got preference on generation and transmission. So plus we've got 2 major power lines coming across the res, and the easements have expired. So we've got some bargaining power here that we're going to start getting into. Carbon sequestration. That's another big area that, you know, where there's a lot of trees and timber and other growth. That's something we need to get into. Next slide. These are 2 areas where tribes really have some power. And this has been recognized even by the Supreme Court. Under the environmental side, under the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, tribes can have higher quality standards than the state or federal government. But again, we need good scientific data, right? Technical data, hydrologists, you know, all of that technical person. Clean Water Act, that's another area we need to work. I'll be working on. Safe Drinking Water Act. And tribes can assume these top 3 programs. They can't assume these 2 yet. This is solid waste here. Another big issue for a lot of our communities, right? Resource conservation. And then under the Antiquities Act, the Antiquities Act was back in, I think, 1906 or 1907. One of the first paragraphs talked about recognizing tribal archaeological and cultural resources. That never hardly ever happens either. But that's another area we got to focus on. The National Historic Preservation Act, the regulations for that act were written by Vine Delorier Jr. And tribes have authority off reservation. Well, that's, again, an important area. And then on the other side, on the environmental side, I think tribes should have a Tribal Environmental Policy Act patterned after the National Environmental Policy Act. Rather than a NEPA, we have a TIPA, right? But that gives us authority over everybody that comes on the res. What are you doing? They have to fill out a permit. What are you doing? Are you going to be using power? Are you going to be using water? Are you going to be contaminating the air? What are you going to be doing? You got to have that control. Yeah, this act gives us off reservation authority. So does this one. In fact, all of these do, but again, we got to push for it. The Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, American Indian Freedom and Regiment. And I think I put this backwards. I think it's American Indian religious freedom. Honestly. Tribes affiliated. Most are headed by a chairman. And this is what you really, that's what I was telling my board of directors for GYC. You really got to figure out each tribe. You know, there's nobody like Wind River because we have no constitution. But you can look at their organizational chart and you can pretty much state if they don't have a water department, we probably shouldn't be trying to pursue water rights right now, right? Or if they don't have natural resources department, you know, so you really look at their organization charts to see what kind of programs and departments and capabilities they have. A lot of these tribes, they have elections every 2 years. So sometimes you can, every 2 years, you got to change. No continuity. You know, no ability to keep things moving. Within that map that I showed you, there are 17 tribal colleges, and we're really connecting with some of those colleges too. Because some of them are doing some pretty good things on learning or teaching and getting language out. A lot of these tribes, their water rights are not fully determined. Most tribes have an environmental department, and so you know that's again we're connecting with those people. 80 of the tribes affiliated with Yellowstone have water quality standards. So now we're trying to figure out what their standards are, how compatible are they down the river? How can we start working with all the other tribes? Energy development, mining on many reservations. A lot of Superfund sites on a lot of reservations. A lot of contaminated sites, mines, you know, oil and gas wells, all kinds of things on different reservations. Hunting and game codes. So, most tribes do not have game codes. And when we adopted ours, I was the chairman of the Fish and Game Code. You know, normally tribes have unlimited, they could go hunting anytime they wanted, any time of year. And so working with the Fish and Wildlife Service when I was on the council, every after the first snow of every year, Fish and Wildlife Service and the state, they fly over different areas to kind of, because you can see the herds when the first snow comes. You can see the herds real good, and you kind of count them in the various areas where they forage and their habitat is. And over the late 70s and early 80s, boy, our herds were dwindling. It's getting smaller and smaller. So if that's why the Fish and Wildlife recommended we get a game code in place to protect them during calving season and you know during winter, harsh winter and all that. And so as a chairman of the Fish and Game Committee, we went out to have public meetings to start explaining why we needed the game code. And those were hellacious meetings, man. We just go out there and get called out for about 3 or 4 straight hours. You're selling us out. You're taking away our treaty right. You're acting like a white man. You're an educated dummy. You know, all those kinds of, they just called us down. And and we had 4 major communities, so we had to do meetings at each community. And I used to, oh no, I got another hunting code meeting tonight. And so, well, when we finally took it to the people, the majority of the people said, let's get a game code. And now we've got better herds in the state of Wyoming in our area. And then on the west central part of the res, we have 138,000 acre roadless area. We're the only reservation that has a roadless area. And then the Wind River Reservation, we're actually part of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. So that's what we're trying to do now. What's our place in the ecosystem and how do we manage and take care of things for the betterment of the ecosystem? And 29 tribes, 26 reservations, that's all get the same water quality standards, right? You know, a few years back, I got contacted by some people in Yankton and the elders, and they had a treaty committee, and then they had a women's society called the Braveheart Society, and then they had a elders council. And the Yankton Reservation there's Fort Randall Dam. It's on the east side of South Dakota. And that's a big, massive dam and a big lake behind that dam. And they've got land above the dam and below the dam, the Yankton Sioux tribe. So they wanted to go in there and start cataloging all their plants and foods and medicines along the river and identifying them, where they're at, and even GPSing them. And then they found out I did work in water rights. So they said, one of the elders called me and she said, we need you to help us with what we're trying to protect our river and our plants. And so she said, we want to do a water code. All right, that's what we do. You know? But anyway, here you had these elders and these groups that wanted to do a code and understand that part, but then you had to have the governance, which is the council. And so I spent about 2 years there because boy, they were all, when I first got there, they were all fighting each other. And so and there was 5 major groups that we had to do: the Treaty Committee, Braveheart Society, Elders Council, a Constitution Revision Committee. They had a constitution. Then you had, they call their council back there the Business and Claims Committee. That's what they call their tribal councils. So there was 5 groups, and they're basically all fighting each other. We finally got to a point where they're almost all agreeing right now. We're ready to get a code. But you had to connect the council to the grassroots. Connect the grassroots to the government. The grassroots makes the policies, the governance drafts the law, right? To support those policies. Legal issues, technical, administrative, pulling that together. So that's what we've been doing for quite a while. That's really an important part of all the work we're doing. That's why we want to have these community education involvement meetings back home, because most of our tribal members don't understand our own sovereignty. And what does it take to breathe life into our treaty and make our government work for us? And, you know, all we're trying to do is strengthen families and communities. That's what any government should be doing. How do we strengthen our families and our communities? So that's what we're trying to do at Wind River. We're using our governance.
Wes, we have about 10 minutes left, and I know there's some burning questions in the.
Oh, okay. Well, let me see what we got here. Go to the next slide. Next one. This is the Wind River sovereignty. Go to the next slide. This is how we created a separation of powers. We designated the Wind River Intertribal Council. That's the 2 tribes, two tribal councils together. There's the executive branch. We created a tribal court back when we adopted our water code. We went to the general council. They're the authority, and they delegated legislative authority to these boards and commissions. And then in our law and order code under chapter 1, we said the executive branch shall not interfere with the judicial legislative branch and vice versa. We created a separation of powers without a constitution. Next slide. Oh, that's it, huh? I thought I had one more, but we need time for questions.
Oh, wait, no, it is showing up down
Yes, sir.
She found another slide. I don't
here.
want
Yeah,
to
it was.
interrupt if you wanted to share something about that. Good. I just wanted to hear more about your vision for the interdisciplinary, scientific and technical expertise you say that's needed. What is it going to take to get that? And who needs it? The tribes need it. Is this about relationships with universities? How do you see that the expertise you need to do these things? How do we get there?
All of the above, and then under the code development process. When we developed our water code, we had Dr. Charles Wilkinson from the University of Colorado and Dr. David Getches from the University of Colorado, 2 top attorneys that we could trust that had federal Indian law and federal Indian water law background. And they came in and helped us develop our water code. There's 4 components of developing a code, the policy making. And I just talked about that with the grassroots, right? They make the policy. Then you have the legal issues, winner's doctrine, other issues that support that. And so then you have the technical issues. That's where you figure out, well, we need a hydrologist. Well, for our tax code, we need an appraiser. Well, for our environmental code, we need a judge. So that's where that technical component comes in, figuring out each one of those. And then the 4th part is a component, the administrative, the manpower, the computers, the office space, the vehicles, you know, all of that support. So we use that. Policy making, legal, technical, administrative. We're using that in all our planning. So that's how we figure out. We need a geologist. We need a hydraulic. And one of our staffers now in our GYC office, Colleen Friday, went to school here. Right on, that's what we need. We need more of them. But when she's out there along the river, we need our elders right beside her, telling those young people about our Indigenous values and beliefs to the river, how we respect that river, how we talk to it, how we make offering. And she's talking to them about the hydrologic cycle. So we do that with our energy, with our environment, with our taxation side of it. And, you know, I met with Temple and some of the Haub school here a couple of months ago, and just listing all of the knowledge and experience and background they have. I went back and I told my crew, I said, hey, we got a lot of people down this that we can call upon to help us. So, you know, and then it's really a two-way street. I told Tempo, we'd really like to have the Haub school people coming up and joining us at some of these community meetings, so you get to know our people and vice versa, start understanding some of the issues and resources we want to develop and how our community will check together.
Thank you.
Rico, did you have a question earlier?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just curious. Are you able to renegotiate treaty rights, or is the treaty set in stone when it got signed, say back in the 1800s?
Well, just like in a Supreme Court decision, the only way you can get a United States Supreme Court decision changed is to go through Congress. If the House and Senate voted to, well, like the Supreme Court just overturned Roe versus Wade, right? Now, if it goes to the House and the Senate, they say, well, we're gonna reinstate Roe versus Wade. So Congress can do that. That's kind of an option, but that's really a long shot. I think water, because back in 1951, Congress adopted what they call the McCarran Amendment, which allows Indian water rights cases to be determined in state courts. That's another sticking the knife in a lot deeper, right? But anyway, we got to get that out of the picture too. So here's I got a good friend down in Chemehuevi in the Colorado River. I said, if you guys start negotiating, tell them we want the McCarran Amendment not to apply to Indian water rights. So I think we can also look at how do we juggle around some of the treaty stipulations that we have to deal with now. Let's negotiate. So I think water is going to give us a lot of power and fight our way out of some of that. But some of it is just, do we really believe Christian discovery and domination is a way we need to be settling these cases? So that's another issue. So there's things coming to a head, and I'm kind of riding the wave right now, and I'm enjoying it because there's a lot of good things happening here, and we're gonna a lot of people, right? But that's how it goes. That's how justice works, right? There's always somebody mad when justice occurs. And we got a lot of justice to occur here. Another question was going to?
I was just wondering if any of like those 49 tribes in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, or specifically within the confines of the Yellowstone National Park, have any hunting rights that?
Yeah, there's still 8 tribes that have hunting rights here. And right now, that's kind of a pretty touchy issue. It's not really hunting. They take some buffalo out to a field and they just sit there and shoot at them. There's communities around, so there's kind of some issues there. That's kind of what we're doing as my role with the Greater Yellowstone Coalition and talking with all the tribes. At Wind River, right now, the only place that can accept Yellowstone buffalo is the Fort Peck Reservation. Put that map back up, the map picture. Oh, here's the one I wanted.
Yeah.
What's it doing way up there?
Oh, it's like,
Well, give me the map.
Okay.
Temple. Right now, all the buffalo that are being distributed to tribes, They take them from Yellowstone up to Fort Peck. Fort Peck Reservation, because they're the only ones that have an established quarantine facility built. When you take a buffalo out of the park, you have to quarantine them for 18 months, testing them and making sure they don't have brucellosis and all of that. And so they can only handle about 300 buffalo a year up there at Fort Peck. Right now, we're reacquiring land, some land that's been purchased on the res through the allotment act to expand our buffalo herd and then build a quarantine facility at Wind River. Last year, the state of Montana passed a law that you cannot transport buffalo across state highways. Against Indians, right? Anti-Indian state law. And so one of the things they were talking about, they said, well, maybe we just need to get some big helicopters and take them over to Yellowstone to some of these reservations. Which is an idea. They did that. I know they did that in Alaska. There was a little tribe up in Alaska that wanted buffalo, and they got one of those great big old army helicopters and took about 10 buffalo to Alaska. So
Yeah.
that might be an option. But here in Wyoming, we're right next to the park. We're only 42 miles away from the park. And we've been working with Superintendent Shawley, and then I was up at Grand Teton yesterday working with, they got buffalo too. And so being in Wyoming with Yellowstone and Grand Teton, we think that's gonna make a lot better transition. We can start quarantining way more buffalo. We've got 100,000 acre area of the res. It's right in the center here. We wanna have 1,000 head of buffalo here in the next few years. And so, but that's all technical and scientific data and information.
Awesome. Well, please join me in thanking Wes for. Another class for me, but we can move next door, and if anybody has some burning questions they want to ask, we can do that. Sort of loud, but maybe just.
And Wes, you're welcome to stay. If you want, we're gonna talk to the Ruggles House Institute Senior Conservation Fellow. These are really about his works.
For tonight.
Yeah.
It's about.
And all of you are welcome to do the same.